Welcome to another HistorySpeak.com podcast. This episode is titled General William T. Sherman's Scorched Earth Warfare Tactics. Learn about the fascinating life of William T. Sherman and his infamous march to the sea during the American Civil War, where he wielded scorched earth warfare tactics to decimate the Confederacy's ability to wage war against the Union. William T. Sherman was born on February 8, 1820, into a politically prominent family in Lancaster, Ohio. His middle name, Tecumseh, was given to him by his father in respect for a Shawnee Indian chief and warrior. After his father unexpectedly died in 1829, a family friend and attorney, Thomas Ewing, raised him. His younger brother, John Sherman, was a U.S. Senator. In 1840, Sherman graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point. In 1853, he left his military career to pursue private business ventures. However, he struggled a little bit to succeed. In 1859, he became superintendent of the Louisiana State Seminary of Learning and Military Academy. That's now Louisiana State University. But he resigned in 1861 when the state of Louisiana seceded from the Union. The Second Seminole War lasted from 1835 to 1842 and was the longest and costliest Native American conflict in United States history. Fought in Florida, the war began when the U.S. government attempted to forcibly relocate the Seminole Indian people and their black Seminole allies to Oklahoma, which was Indian territory, under what was then the Indian Removal Act. From 1840 to 1842, Sherman was with the U.S. Army's 3rd Artillery and was involved in the Second Seminole War in Florida. He arrived in Florida by boat at St. Augustine and served at 3 posts: Fort Lauderdale, Fort Peace, and Piccolata, where his duties included scouting swampy areas in search of renegade Seminoles and commanding a supply depot. In November 1841, he was promoted to first lieutenant. This rank usually required more than 5 years of service, but Sherman received it in less than 2 years. Sherman believed the Second Seminole War was mismanaged. It was delayed by governmental red tape and inaction by field commanders. Sherman's experiences in the Second Seminole War are sometimes used to explain his later aggressive behavior and scorched earth warfare tactics during the American Civil War. Sherman's most notable accomplishment during the Second Seminole War was his negotiations that led to the surrender of Seminole War Chief Wildcat. In 1841, 2 years after his father died, while he was deported to Indian Territory, Wildcat agreed to meet American authorities for peace negotiations. After negotiating with Sherman at the Indian River Post at Fort Pierce, Wildcat agreed to be transported to Fort Gibson in Oklahoma's Indian Territory, along with his remaining 200 followers. Growing depressed over his forced surrender, Wildcat stated, "I was in hopes I would be killed in battle, but a bullet never reached me." The American Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865. It was a destructive conflict between the Union, the North, and the Confederacy, the South. The Confederacy was formed in 1861 by states that had seceded from the Union in an attempt to preserve slavery. The war was primarily fought over the moral, economic, and political issues surrounding the institution of slavery. The Union was victorious, which preserved the United States as a single, indivisible nation, and slavery was abolished. The Battle of Shiloh, which is also known as the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing, was fought from April 6th to 7th in 1862 in southwestern Tennessee. This was Sherman's first major battle serving under Ulysses S. Grant. Sherman nearly made a disastrous mistake by dismissing intelligence reports he received from militia officers. He refused to believe that Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston would leave his secure base in Corinth northeastern Mississippi, Sherman did not prepare for an attack beyond strengthening his picket lines and refused to entrench or send out reconnaissance patrols. A massive Confederate attack on the morning of April 6, 1862, took most of the senior Union commanders, including Sherman, by surprise. Despite being caught unprepared by the attack, Sherman conducted himself well under fire and rallied his division and conducted an orderly fighting retreat that helped prevent a Confederate rout of the Union forces. The Battle of Shiloh reinforced Sherman's self-confidence, and he was promoted to Major General of the Volunteers. In November of 1861, Sherman was placed in command of the Department of the Cumberland in Kentucky. He began suffering from delusions and believed that President Lincoln broke his promise by giving him such a prominent position this early into the Civil War. He was relieved of command due to what was most likely a nervous breakdown. By mid-December 1861, he recovered sufficiently and returned to service. The Cincinnati Commercial, a newspaper in Sherman's home state, described him as insane, a label that followed him for much of his life. The mere mention of the name of General Sherman brings visions of fire and smoke, destruction, desolation, Atlanta in flames, plantations and farms destroyed, and railroad tracks mangled beyond recognition. To most people who think about Sherman, whether they are Northerners or Southerners, they believe he was a wartime brute who rampaged and destroyed property and food sources and had no remorse for the loss of human life and the massive destruction he left behind. The complete story regarding Sherman is much more complicated. There is no doubt that Sherman practiced destructive warfare, scorched earth warfare tactics, but he did not do it out of personal cruelty because his goal was to end the American Civil War as quickly as possible and with the least loss of life possible on both sides. The Southern people cannot be made to love us, but may be made to fear us and dread the passage of Union troops through their country. This was a letter Sherman wrote to General Grant on October 4, 1862. The Vicksburg campaign consisted of many important naval operations, troop maneuvers, and 11 distinct battles. Sherman, being notorious as a poor disciplinarian, ignored many cruel, violent, and deliberate actions by his troops against citizens in occupied territory. He believed all Southerners had a collective responsibility for guerrilla attacks against Union troops. He used the term guerrilla to even mean military attacks against the Union. Sherman's troops quickly moved through the Mississippi countryside without a fixed base and were able to eat well by pillaging towns, villages, and homes from the finest to the slave cabins. Sherman's troops used scorched earth warfare tactics as they looted or destroyed anything that could be used by the Confederate Army, but arson was the main tactic, as any buildings that might serve any military purpose were burnt down. Additionally, many homes of citizens and slaves were burnt as well, and any animals that were not taken were killed and left to rot. After the surrender of Vicksburg to the Union forces under Grant on July 4, 1863, Sherman was given the rank of Brigadier General in the regular army, in addition to his rank as Major General of the Volunteers. This map shows the path of destruction through Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina that Sherman's army inflicted upon the Confederacy. The Atlanta campaign was a series of battles fought throughout northwest Georgia and the area around the city of Atlanta during the summer of 1864. Sherman invaded Georgia from Chattanooga, Tennessee, in the beginning of May 1864. General John Bell Hood's Confederates, who occupied Atlanta, attempted a series of daring frontal attacks, but was outmaneuvered by Sherman's group of armies. The Confederates were defeated in the Atlanta campaign, and the city fell into the hands of the Union on September 2, 1864. Sherman's troops, now hardened and trained in scorched earth warfare tactics, destroyed farms, towns, homes, railroad tracks, and countryside north and northwest of Atlanta during the campaign. But the punishment that the city of Atlanta received was almost unprecedented in the history of the United States Army. Sherman forced the citizens from their homes and businesses and consequently destroyed virtually the entire city. 11/12 of the city was burned. Only 400 homes of the 3,800 survived. Sherman stated, "Atlanta is ours and fairly won." Now realizing a means to end the Civil War by using scorched earth warfare tactics, Sherman prepared for the infamous March to the Sea, where nothing in the path of his armies was safe. Scorched earth warfare is sometimes referred to as ruthless war or unrestricted war or hard war. Scorched earth warfare is a military strategy that intends to destroy anything that might be useful to the enemy while it is advancing through or withdrawing from a location. Any assets that could be used by the enemy may be targeted, including food sources, water supplies, transportation, communications, industrial resources, and even the local people themselves. Scorched earth warfare can be conducted in enemy territory or in the military's own home territory. Scorched earth warfare has been practiced for centuries and can be traced all the way back to the Gallic Wars from 58 BC to 50 BC, where the Roman military campaigns led by Julius Caesar, where the Roman army destroyed all property in their path and subjugated the people of the Gallic tribes. On a historical note, Article 54 of Protocol 1 of the 1977 Geneva Conventions has banned the strategy of destroying the food and water supply of a civilian population in an area of conflict. Sherman said, "Should guerrillas or bushwhackers molest our march, or should the inhabitants burn bridges, obstruct roads, or otherwise manifest local hostility, the Army commander should order and enforce a devastation more or less relentless to the measure of such hostility." Sherman's march to the sea included 60,000 Union soldiers and covered 285 miles. His forces marched towards Savannah in two wings, right and left, about 30 miles apart, and used scorched earth warfare tactics as they destroyed military targets, as well as industry, railroad systems, infrastructure, and civilian property, which disrupted the Confederacy's economy and transportation networks. Sherman's bold move of operating deep within the enemy territory and without supply lines is considered to be one of the major accomplishments and achievements of the American Civil War. The speed and efficiency of the destruction by Sherman's army was impressive, as approximately 300 miles of rail lines in 40 counties of central Georgia were rendered useless during the 5-week march. The Confederate soldiers that were in Georgia during the March to the Sea did not have the numbers or the resources to match Sherman's armies, so they fled south ahead of Sherman's troops in an attempt to disrupt and slow the Union's advance. The Confederate soldiers wreaked their own havoc as they destroyed bridges, chopped down trees, and burned barns filled with provisions before the Union Army could reach them. But this had little effect as Sherman's march to the sea swiftly advanced through Georgia. Sherman's army left a wake of destruction, up to 60 miles wide and 300 miles long, from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia. Approximately 5,000 horses, 4,000 mules, 13,000 head of cattle, and millions of pounds of corn and fodder had been seized by Sherman's men. The plundering of towns in Georgia became widespread, and on occasion Southern women were raped. Union officers usually ordered the execution of such offenders. Sherman himself estimated that the campaign had inflicted $100 million, that's about $2.13 billion in 2026 dollars, in destruction, about 1/5 of which was to the advantage of the Union, while the remainder is simple waste and destruction. Sherman's armies reached the outskirts of Savannah on December 10, 1864, and was informed that there were 10,000 Confederate soldiers entrenched in strategic fighting positions. The Confederate soldiers flooded the surrounding rice fields, leaving only narrow causeways available to approach the city. Sherman was blocked from linking up with his United States Navy forces as he had planned to replenish supplies. So he dispatched cavalry to Fort McAllister, guarding the Okeechee River, in hopes of unblocking his route and obtaining the supplies on the U.S. Navy ships. On December 13, 1864, William B. Hazen's divisions of Howard's Wing stormed the fort in the Battle of Fort McAllister and captured it within 15 minutes. Some of the 134 Union casualties were caused by torpedoes, a name for crude landmines that were used only rarely during the Civil War. On December 20th, 1864, the Confederate soldiers decided not to surrender, but to escape as they crossed the Savannah River on makeshift pontoon bridges. The next morning, December 21st, 1864, Savannah's mayor, Richard Dennis Arnold, with a delegation of aldermen and ladies of the city, rode out until they were unhorsed by fleeing Confederate cavalrymen to offer a proposition. The city would surrender and offer no resistance in exchange for General Gary's promise to protect the city's citizens and their property. Gary telegraphed Sherman, who advised him to accept the offer. Savannah may have been spared by the devastation that befell other southern cities on Sherman's march to the sea, but Sherman ordered his troops to seize cotton, guns, and artillery and occupy the city for several weeks. On December 22, 1864, Sherman sent a telegraph to President Lincoln, quote, "I beg to present you a Christmas gift, the city of Savannah, with 150 heavy guns and plenty of ammunition, and also about 25,000 bales of cotton." There are many theories as to why Sherman spared Savannah, including one that said he had a girlfriend there. The most feasible theories are a deal had already been struck and approved by Sherman, Brigadier General John W. Gary, and the mayor of Savannah, Dr. Richard Arnold, who met and settled upon terms of the surrender of the city. The city would surrender without resistance in exchange for the promise by Gary to protect the city's citizens and their property. Another theory was that the United States Department of the Treasury had Treasury Agent A.G. Brown in Savannah several days before Christmas in 1864 for the purpose of laying claim to certain highlights of the spoils, including 25,000 to 38,000 bales of cotton captured by the Union. It was really his idea that Sherman should present the city as a gift to President Lincoln. Sherman agreed and said, "Why destroy it if you're going to gift wrap it?" After Sherman captured Savannah, the culmination of his march to the sea, General Grant ordered him to sail his army on ships to reinforce the Army of the Potomac and the Army of the James and Virginia. This is where Grant was bogged down during the siege of Petersburg against Confederate General Robert E. Lee. But Sherman persuaded Grant that he should march north through the Carolinas instead, destroying everything of military value along the way and tearing the Confederacy into smaller pieces. Sherman was particularly interested in targeting South Carolina, as that was the first state to secede from the Union, for its effect it would have on Southern morale. Sherman's army marched towards Columbia, South Carolina in late January 1865. His 60,000 soldiers divided into three wings and into multiple directions simultaneously, confusing the scattered Confederate defenders as to what his true objective really was, which was the state capital of South Carolina. The Union Army crossed difficult terrain and swamps that formed a natural barrier getting into Columbia, South Carolina. On February 17, 1865, the mayor surrendered Columbia to Sherman. That night, a fire destroyed one-third of the city. Sherman blamed the Confederates for leaving burning cotton bales in the streets. Vengeful former slaves and ex-Union prisoners of war held at nearby Camp Sorghum have also been named as possible culprits to the massive arson. South Carolina's railroads, infrastructure, buildings, and farms suffered the same fate as Georgia did during the March to the Sea. The destruction of railroad lines by Sherman's army was remarkable. The practice of heating rails and bending them around trees, leaving behind what came to really be known as Sherman's neckties, made repairs difficult, costly, and very time-consuming. How to tie a Sherman necktie in 3 simple steps. Number 1, build a bonfire. Number 2, heat a railway rail until it's malleable. And number 3, when red hot, bend and twist around a tree like a bow tie. The origin of the term bummers is associated to Sherman's foragers during the March to the Sea and the Carolinas campaign. Many Union soldiers believe the term struck terror in the hearts of the Southern people. During the March to the Sea and the Carolina campaign, Union soldiers were authorized to live off the land since it was Sherman's intent to make Georgia howl and to lay just as heavy a hand on to South Carolina, which many Federals considered a hellhole of secession. Many who marched through Georgia and the Carolinas disregarded these prohibitions. Too often, foraging parties of the bummers became bands of marauders and stole personal property from citizens. On April 26, 1865, Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston surrendered 89,270 soldiers to Union General William Sherman near Greensboro, North Carolina. This was the second largest surrender of Confederate soldiers during the American Civil War. Over 8,000 men had deserted Johnston's army, and he realized his men were tired of fighting and on the brink of total desertion. Johnston, ignoring Confederate President Jefferson Davis, signed the surrender of his army and all the Confederate forces in the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida over to Sherman. Johnston's soldiers were ordered to stack their arms at Greensboro, North Carolina, and go home, while Johnston signed a statement stating he would never again take up arms against the United States. There was a lot of criticism of Sherman because many thought he was too lenient towards the Confederacy. Prior to General Johnston's surrender, Sherman offered him terms similar to those Grant gave to Lee. In addition, Sherman would grant all surrendering Confederates United States citizenship. Pleased with these terms, Sherman forwarded them to Washington for approval. Unfortunately, many Northerners sharply criticized Sherman for being too lenient. Senator William Sprague summed up the feelings of many in Congress when he wrote a letter to President Andrew Johnson calling for the immediate removal of Sherman from command. However, Sherman remained in command. Sherman said, "War's glory is all moonshine. Even success most brilliant is over dead and mangled bodies, with anguish and lamentation of distant families." On July 25, 1866, Congress created the rank of General of the Army for Ulysses S. Grant, and then promoted Sherman to Lieutenant General. In 1869, when Grant was elected President of the United States, Sherman was appointed Commanding General of the United States Army and promoted to General of the Army. Sherman's time as Commanding General of the United States Army was mainly devoted to making the Western and Plains states safe for settlement by displacing Native American Indians through the continuation of the American Indian Wars. Sherman stepped down as Commanding General of the United States Army on November 1st, 1883, and officially retired from the Army on February 8, 1884. Sherman was proposed as Republican candidate for the presidential election of 1884, but declined as sternly as possible by famously saying, "I will not accept if nominated and will not serve if elected." This term has been used as a rejection of candidacy ever since, and is now referred to as the Shermanesque statement. Sherman lived in New York City for most of his retirement. He did some writing, painting, and was devoted to the theater. He was an exhilarating speaker and frequently quoted Shakespeare. Sherman maintained a post-war friendship bond with Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston. Sherman died of pneumonia in New York City on February 14, 1891, at the age of 71. Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston served as an honorary pallbearer at his funeral. During the procession in New York City on February 19, 1891, Johnston kept his hat off as a sign of respect, although the weather was cold and rainy. Someone concerned for his health asked him to put his hat on, to which Johnston replied, "If I were in his place and he were standing here in mine, he would not put on his hat." Johnston caught a cold that day, which wound up developing into pneumonia. Johnston died several weeks later in Washington, D.C. President Benjamin Harrison ordered all national flags to be flown at half-mast in respect to William T. Sherman.